Hello, Canada. Welcome back to another edition of the Canadian Citizen Journal. I'm your host, alias Tagai. So, got a fair amount of news we're going to try and report here. I'm going to try and get through it as quick as possible. And we're going to start off with, obviously, the earthquake that hit Alberta. So a 5.2 magnitude earthquake struck northern Alberta Thursday morning with no record of it causing any damage. The earthquake was located 63 kilometers northeast of Grande Cache, 93 kilometers south by southeast of Grande Prairie, and 345 kilometers west of Edmonton, and struck at a depth of 5 kilometers. Earthquakes Canada added that the earthquake struck at 8:41 Thursday morning. So Earthquakes Canada added that it was lightly felt in Edson, Grande Prairie, Whitecourt, and Prince George, BC, and some people in Edmonton took to social media to report that they felt an earthquake Thursday morning. Quotes are, "I felt it a bit in Edmonton, very mild," wrote a Reddit user, while another just stated, "Just felt a tremor and saw some things sway here in South Edmonton." Alberta's no stranger to earthquakes, including a 5.8 magnitude earthquake back in November of 2022 and a 5.0 magnitude in March of 2023. BC, with the Cascadian fault line, is actually setting, they're starting to really get serious, which it's about time. Better late than never, I guess. There's a swell that's forming along the Cascadian. It's rising at an incredible rate. We'll probably do a show another time on that, but they're starting to get their emergency preparedness started on that, which is good to hear, because the earthquake thing is really been dominoing in the last 2.5 years, and judging by a lot of the studies, especially like the Cascadian, we are 100 years behind on the, we'll call it like a mathematical average. Now, of course, you can't take an average because it's not like it happens the same date every same 100 years or whatever, but this is the longest that geologists have found that that tectonic plate hasn't actually given a severe earthquake, which, by the way, back I think it was in the late or early 1800s, caused it was so huge it sunk forests and caused the largest tsunamis on record in Asia. So moving right along, St. Ange, Heritage Minister, announcing she's going to spend more money on Radio Canada, especially the French version. And if you watched my previous shows, you'll know that the Quebec media is the most biased media in Canada. Hands down. I've seen it myself. I've worked across this country. It's no surprise. Let's just kind of run a short clip.
Canada's outgoing Heritage Minister has unveiled her vision for the future of the CBC. Pascal Saint-Onge says that with an increase of media control by American billionaires, the public broadcaster should act as a safeguard for our country's cultural sovereignty. I want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. She's in our nation's capital. So what do we know about this plan?
Well, it was so interesting to hear Pascal Saint-Onge, who is not going to run again, but sort of as her last big job here before we do head into potentially a spring election, unveiling this plan and framing it as consistent with something that was important a century ago when the CBC was first set up to offer a national Canadian voice in a world where otherwise, as people rode the railway, they had only American content to listen to. Again, Canadian sovereignty at the forefront of political conversations here in Canada. And Canada's public broadcaster, in the words of the minister, essential to having a way for Canadians to control what people can know about their own country, to not be sort of the victim of disinformation or sort of have facts defined by the algorithms of platforms controlled elsewhere. The importance of having a national broadcaster at work for Canadians as a public service, particularly.
Okay, that's pretty much all I'm going to run on this. Janice McGregor is one of those biased media personalities out there. You've probably seen other clips that I've put of her. Now, as a creator, the censorship in this country is ridiculous. And it's not just on YouTube, it's on any search engine or platform you use. Our government censors everything. Now, pardon me, my phone's been going off the hook here today. It's been kind of crazy. I use a VPN to get me out of the country so I can get real news, not propaganda. Because our algorithms set up in Canada by these search engines, by YouTube, by especially like Facebook, literally hide or make it incredibly difficult to find the truth. So, we're going to move right on here to more news.
Serious, but ask residents
into an investigation into a residential break-and-enter committed by crime groups in the area. Let's listen in.
Important, less serious, but ask residents who have been the victim of these crimes how they feel about these acts. They will tell you that they feel violated, shattered, shaken, and in many cases walking into homes that have been ransacked, windows smashed, doors kicked. Priceless, sentimental items gone. These are experiences that have long-lasting effects and an impact on these victims. The Supreme Court of Canada has affirmed that the sanctity of a home is deeply rooted in our society, recognizing that the home is a place where Canadians should be afforded the highest expectation of privacy and security.
That's why the same courts have ruled against anybody who has defended themselves in their home. We've got numerous examples of this where somebody broke into somebody's house. Like there was one that happened here about, I think it was 8 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, where the guy woke up with an arrow through his head and saw another man loading another arrow. This guy got up with an arrow in his head, tackled the guy, ended up killing him and getting charged. He got charged and was found guilty. And there's piles of them. Now I'll have to relook up at that case. I don't know I can't remember exactly what it was, but this has happened over and over and over again. And the way that the law is set up is that you can't use excessive force in order to protect yourself. So if a guy comes in your house and he's got a machete, you're only allowed to use a machete or something lesser than that to defend yourself. Explain that to a small person. Explain that to a person who's waking up with a bolt, an arrow through their head. So this whole news thing is that there's 20 suspects that are charged, and this deals with a series of break and enters in the York region. And on one of yesterday's videos, I showed you a couple arsonists that were going around to a new development and they were burning it. This is getting out of control in Canada. This deals with the corruption. Once again, back to the corruption. If it starts at the top, the bottom takes the brunt of it. It gets out of hand, and that's what's going on in Canada. We're going to move on.
Police believe are responsible for the 4 homicides on Carrie to Kettle, Nakota Nation about more than 2 weeks ago. The announcement was made just a few hours ago at RCMP headquarters in Regina, and Wayne Mantica was there, and he joins us tonight with more details. Wayne, what can you tell us about this investigation?
Boris, RCMP say this was a very complex investigation involving police agencies right across Saskatchewan and multiple cities and right into Manitoba. Now, they say they interviewed about 50 people over the course of the investigation and conducted multiple searches for evidence. Yesterday, they felt they finally had enough information to lay charges, and 2 individuals were arrested. Now, this was the announcement about the arrests made this afternoon at RCMP headquarters here in Regina.
18-year-old Darius Reset was arrested in Yorkton, and a male youth who cannot be named according to the Youth Criminal Justice Act was arrested on Carry the Kettle. Darius Reset has been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder in the relation to the deaths of 34-year-old Tracy Hodamani of Carry the Kettle, Nakota Nation, 44-year-old Sheldon Kuzantz of Zagame Anishinaabeg, 47-year-old Shauna Fay of Indian Head, and 51-year-old Terry Jack of Carry the Kettle, Nakota Nation.
It's getting out of hand. The violence is getting out of hand, and I wouldn't doubt it if this ends up tying somehow into the fentanyl trafficking that's going on in Canada. That is just epidemic. And again, with the evidence, especially if you watch my episode and go back on some of the series, you'll see the bombshells that have been dropped in the last few years, but especially in the last 3 to 5 months. This is crazy. And now just some sad news.
Of deceased Israeli hostages. The militant group is believed to have handed over the remains of Cherie Bibas and her 2 children, Ariel and Kafir, as well as 83-year-old Oded Lifshitz. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News contributor Robert Berger. He's following developments for us from Jerusalem, just past 2 in the afternoon where you are, Robert. The bodies, I understand, have been transported by convoy. I was seeing some of the footage into Israel. Describe that to us and what happens next.
Well, it's a very somber day here in Israel because the Bibas family, the mother and the 2 kids, the images of them being abducted from their kibbutz on October 7th have simply stuck with the nation. It symbolizes the agony of the nation. Kfir Bibas was only...
So, I know this is somber, it's sad, but you gotta understand this, and the media it is really not helping. Kate, I lost a couple Palestinian friends who went back years ago because there was a little bit of a scuffle going on. They went back to try and help their families and pull their families out. Now the story, especially from one of them that he told me, broke my heart. And when I saw when he showed me the scars on his body from what Hamas did to him, trying to beat that ideology into him, really woke me up. Now, God rest their souls. Neither of them came back. Neither of them have ever been heard from since. It was Hamas that did it to their own Palestinian people. These guys are animals. On that day, they were live streaming what they were doing. It was some of the most grotesque footage I have ever seen. I'm not going to put any of it on. First of all, I wouldn't be allowed to. They would censor me. But second of all, you don't need to see it. But it entailed showing like babies, women, pregnant women. It was horrific. Hamas has to be removed off the face of the planet. It's taken over Palestine. This has caused all the conflict. There are good Palestinians, but they're either being run out or their generations are being brainwashed. We've got to end this. And it starts with stopping all funding going to this group. And enough with recognizing Hamas as some political party. Gross. Disgusting. I can't believe that my government was supporting this and still is. Sad. Moving on.
It's a little bit fitting that we gather here today in this room, for a room that where I've spent so much time over the past almost 6 years. often during some very trying and uncertain times. COVID-19, potato wart, threat of violence on our schools, and during some of the most destructive hurricanes to ever hit our province's shores. Those were tough days, many of them long, working well into the night along with my cabinet colleagues and so many professional public servants who set aside their lives to do whatever they could to help our province move forward. But there have been very many positive moments here too, moments to share new programs and new government services, updates on transformative change that our government led, or moments where we've been able to share that we were turning the corner as a province and that the light at the end of the tunnel was bright and that better days were ahead. While it's easier to remember the challenges, I suppose, I stand here today knowing and feeling that there have been more positives than negative over the last 6 years. Through all of those moments, whatever the situation, as your Premier, I've tried to be honest, upfront, and sincere, and I've tried my very best to connect directly and genuinely with Islanders and not just talk to you. And today I'm bringing those same principles as I share with you some news that is a little bit maybe shocking and difficult and emotional for some, but it's news that I believe is in the best interest of the government, in the best interest of our party, and the best interest of the people of Prince Edward Island, and the best interest of my family. Earlier today, I shared with my caucus colleagues that I would be stepping down as the Premier and the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Prince Edward Island, effective noon tomorrow.
He's gone. Now, the Bureau's dropping more bombshells all the time. This is the latest. RCMP transcript. Wilson Raybould calls for laws to limit power of Trudeau and his aides. The Prime Minister, I think, would have liked to have had my authority under the Act, Jody told RCMP in the SNC Lavalin Review. An explosive RCMP transcript, Jody Wilson-Raybould told an investigator that she believed Justin Trudeau and his office had unchecked powers, as evidenced by their potentially unlawful pressure for intervention to block a criminal prosecution of SNC Lavalin. And, as Attorney General, she believed Canada needed laws to protect its democracy from the excessive power of the Prime Minister. The transcript released by Democracy Watch was made public as the organization announced yesterday that it has applied to an Ontario court to proceed with a private prosecution against Trudeau. Yay! Including a legal opinion from a retired Superior Court justice supporting charges of obstruction of justice and possibly breach of trust. Now, it goes on and on. Here's a quote. In our democracy, the power of the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office is not checked the way it should be, which requires laws to be changed or amended, Raybould told the RCMP politically sensitive case detective in Ottawa. There is a very conscious effort by the government to adhere to what SNC wanted. The conclusion apparently stemmed from meetings like her tense encounter with Trudeau's clerk of the Privy Council on December 18, 2018, where she said Michael Wernick seemed at the time to be trying to play a bit of a go-between between me and the Prime Minister's office. In their mind, that I wouldn't do what they asked me to do without thinking about it. And Michael Wernick was trying to explain to me the nature of the relationship between the PMO and myself and the Department of Justice, she said, adding, the Prime Minister, I think, would have liked to have had my authority under the Act because he would have done something completely different. In another meeting with Wernick, Wilson-Raybould described how he repeatedly framed the SNC criminal case around economic concerns and pressed her to take action. The clerk, like he did in the December meeting, was trying to explain to me that I could do more than I was willing to do, and he again went back to jobs, which we know is all a lie. That was the nature of the fact that I wasn't doing what the Prime Minister wanted me to do, and he saw it as entirely within my domain as the Attorney General, and he wasn't listening to me when I told him no, but just kept at it. This goes on and on and on. We'll be dealing a lot more with this. I'll probably be doing an entire video on, because this is unraveling on a daily basis. My phone is going off like crazy since I posted this. This is real, people. Just because mainstream isn't talking about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. When mainstream doesn't talk about it, you know it's real. So we're going to move on. A little bit more here with Mark Carney. So there was a couple articles that came out about some lost money and how Carney was involved in it and where he was at the time. So I'm going to kind of skip the articles because they're all using quotes from kind of older articles. So I'm just going to go back to the older article that everybody's kind of using, and then we'll move on from there. So this is Oxfam. They did an audit. So up to $41 billion in World Bank climate finance not being properly tracked, Oxfam finds. Up to $41 billion in the World Bank climate finance, nearly 40% of all climate funds dispersed by the bank over the past 7 years, is unaccounted for due to poor record-keeping practices, reveals new Oxfam report published today ahead of the World Bank and IMF annual meetings in D.C. An Oxfam audit of the World Bank in 2017 to 2023 climate finance portfolio found that between 24 and 41 billion in climate finance went unaccounted for between the time projects were approved and when they closed. There is no clear public record showing where this money went or how it was used, which makes any assessment of its impacts impossible. It also remains unclear whether these funds were even spent on climate-related initiatives intended to help low- and middle-income countries protect people from the impacts of the climate crisis and invest in clean energy. The bank is quick to brag about its climate finance billions, but these numbers are based on what it plans to spend, not on what it actually spends once a project gets rolling, said Kate Donald, head of Oxfam International's Washington, D.C. office. This is like asking your doctor to assess your diet only by looking at your grocery list without ever checking what actually ends up in your fridge. So it goes on and on. It's a lot of money. It's pretty crazy. But the biggest kicker is that this is linked to Mark Carney. You know, I'm going to read it anyways because it's good to hear the whole thing. So the issue of climate finance will take center stage at this year's COP in Azerbaijan. I love that word, Azerbaijan. It rolls off the tongue. Azerbaijan, where countries are set to negotiate a new global climate finance goal. The new collective quantified goal, NCQG, climate activists are demanding the global north provide at least $5 trillion a year in public finances to the global south as a down payment towards their climate debt to these countries. People and communities of the global south who are in the least responsible for climate breakdown, but are the most effective. Oxfam warns that the lack of traceable spending could undermine trust in global climate financial efforts at this critical juncture. Climate finance is scarce, and yes, we know it's hard to deliver, but not tracking how or where the money actually gets spent, that's not just some bureaucratic oversight, it's a fundamental breach of trust that risks derailing the progress we need to make at COP this year. The bank needs to act like our future depends on tackling the climate crisis because it does, says Donald. Yeah, whatever. Oxfam's investigation revealed that obtaining even basic information on how the World Bank is using climate finance was painstaking and difficult. We had to sift through layers of complex and incomplete reports, and even then the data was full of gaps and inconsistencies. The fact that this information is so hard to access and understand is alarming. It shouldn't take a team of professional researchers to figure out how billions of dollars meant for climate action are being spent. This should be transparent and accessible to everyone. Most importantly, communities who are meant to benefit from the climate finance. So, this is what the Straits Times has wrote about it, okay? So the World Bank Group is leading a new initiative aimed at driving more private sector investment to emerging markets with an initial focus on renewable energy and energy infrastructure. The Private Sector Investment Lab will be led by the World Bank Group President Ajay Banga, working alongside co-chairs Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor, and the Prudential Chair Shrita Vadera. Mr. Carney's involvement connects the World Bank with the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, GVANZ, which he also chairs. GVANZ's members include more than 550 firms across 50 countries. For years, the World Bank and other multilateral organizations have failed to mobilize the vast sums of financing needed to help developing countries cope with the fallout from climate change. As pressure mounts on such groups to consider more drastic measures, World Bank is now ready to let vulnerable disaster-hit countries pause their debt repayments. So this just goes on and on, talking about like to help address climate change, investment in emerging markets and developing economies must scale fourfold, said Mr. Carney, who is the United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Action and serves as chair and head of the Transition Investing at Brookfield Asset Management. Now, where am I going with this? Well, listen carefully.
Big names with their own money? Is it asset managers or is it advisory?
Well, first thing is what we're looking to do is approaches that can scale. So it's not just one deal. That's the thing. We've had enough of bespoke one-off transactions. We need to take now some of those actually have the potential to scale. Those would be some of the first we'll interrogate and determine whether or not we can get multiple asset managers, multiple pension funds and sovereign wealth funds coming in.
Did you hear that? Multiple pension funds. Now this happened to our pension fund. They're locking the Canadian, well they've already, what they did is, and it's cheating, is they're using the pension fund to prop up our GDP. And they're doing so because our GDP is so low. Like it's plummeting. This guy wants to lock 100% of the pension funds and use government to push the green initiative for his investors.
In behind those, but also new ideas that come in as well. So it's broad, it's open source. This is going to be for global finance to access.
So what can we expect from you as World Bank president?
Scale and replicate. That's what I want to do. Yeah. I believe that there's enough good ideas out there. The question is, have we identified the ones that really work, that are scalable, replicable, fit for purpose for countries? One size doesn't fit all, but there are scalable, replicable things, and that's what you should watch me do.
But so how do you entice people to actually replicate and scale?
Well, if you have the right, for example, let's talk about risk for a minute.
Yeah.
If it's political risk or macroeconomic risk, or is it FX risk or different kinds of risk that are different from the risk that a typical private operator would have,
right.
Construction risk, management of the project risk, operating at risk, that's a different thing. So we're going to talk about those risks and see if we can create the right vehicles. In the case of FX, there is a whole set, there's a vehicle called TCX. Is that the right opportunity? Are there other vehicles that need to be created that help in a few selected countries remove some of the FX volatility?
Catch that? That's Canada. The risk of a few countries, to help the rest of the world. We are the sacrificial lamb to make these people rich.
Which also, by the way, drives the cost very high, sometimes disproportionately so.
Which is what we're seeing in Canada. The carbon tax has destroyed the middle class and caused 25% of Canadians to live in poverty.
If you work your way through the cycle, very often that actual FX cost that you're paying today does not turn out to be the true cost over the course of a cycle.
And this again is a setup, the true cost, and et cetera, like he was saying. This is going to happen to this high-speed rail. They've locked in guarantors. They've locked in these companies that are all part of the investment firms of Carney and the rest of his global elitists. And they are going to use these excuses in order to have cost overruns and push the burden on us taxpayers instead of the investors.
Another way you scale is when you come up with new financial technologies, there's a few people who understand them initially, but you prove it through transactions. And then finance, it's a competitive business. People want to get involved in them. They see different, and that's part of the point. Is we need to have the bank needs to have a core group of instruments, as well as other multilateral development banks, that people understand, that it becomes a focus on the specific project as opposed to the overall financing structure, and that's how you get true scale.
Do we need a new Bretton Woods agreement? And if we do, are we actually going to get one?
Oh, I don't think that has anything to do with this.
Worth the watch. I post all my links in the description. Please go through them. I want everybody to learn as much as they can, and like I said, it takes me hours upon hours to find a lot of this information, and then I have to sift it, which is kind of a way to go through to debunk what is real and what is fake. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. I don't get a lot of sleep, especially since I just launched this channel and I'm setting up, and I'm hoping that when my new internet service comes through here, hopefully this weekend, that my time will be cut down. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I would really like it if you would like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you punch that notifications button so you don't miss a future episode. Until next time, you've been watching the Canadian Citizen Journal. I'm your host, Alias Tagay.